Hi, everyone. I'm Maggie McGrath, senior editor at Forbes. A three-judge panel at the Court of International Trade ruled Wednesday night that Donald Trump's Liberation Day tariffs exceeded the authority that he has under emergency law to issue tariffs. A second federal court, also on Thursday, declared Trump's tariffs unlawful. Joining us to discuss these developments and what it all means is Jonathan Todd. He's an attorney at Benesch who is a national authority on supply chain management. Jonathan, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Maggie. I'm happy to.
So, tariffs have been in the news really ever since Liberation Day, but let's break down what we've heard from the Court of International Trade and also what we heard from the second court earlier today. What were their rulings?
Right. So the news that happened last night was that the Court of International Trade ruled in favor of two sets of plaintiffs. Just for context, there was a group of importers that had sued to challenge the legality of these tariffs, and there was also a group of states that also sued to challenge the legality. The Court of International Trade sided with those importers, both the states and the individual companies, and determined that these tariffs, and particularly the rationale for the tariffs, was not lawful. These tariffs were based on something called IEEPA. This is a law that allows emergency powers to the president, if necessary, to protect the country from true national emergencies. The argument that ultimately won over the court was that these circumstances in which the president used IEEPA for these tariffs in 2025 did not qualify as national emergencies. They overextended the rationale for asserting tariffs under IEEPA. And in the case of the fentanyl tariffs, which some may remember from early on in first quarter, the tariffs didn't even address the harm. The tariffs didn't directly address the issue of stopping fentanyl from coming across the borders. So the result of this is that the universal 10% tariffs and the reciprocal tariffs that are across the board on a number of countries, although everything reduced to 10%, those are now in legal jeopardy. There was also a lifting of small parcel de minimis value shipments, the ability to do that from China. That is in jeopardy now. And then the tariffs on Canada and Mexico goods and also Chinese goods from earlier in the year that were, again, targeting fentanyl and cross-border immigration issues, those are in jeopardy. Folks still need to keep paying. This is the number one question I get. Can I stop paying today? The answer is no. What the court did last night was it required administrative agencies to, within 10 days, effectuate the order. But today, another court, the Court of Appeals, stayed that order from last night. And so right now we're in a wait and see position to just see how this plays out. But it is a very interesting development that happened, just within the last couple of hours.
So, the International Court of Trade basically says the president overstepped his authority. Today, the U.S. Court of Appeals put a stay on that. So, we're basically in limbo, and anyone paying these tariffs needs to keep paying. Is that the summation of where we
Yeah,
stand?
yeah, that's right. There are two parts to this. One is that, these new tariffs, the reciprocal and then the fentanyl-based tariffs, those are challenged now. Those are, in theory, in jeopardy. We'll have to see how the appeals play out. But until that happens, folks still need to keep paying. There's no relief until this is all final. And even then, I'm receiving questions from clients about, how will we get money back and do we have to apply? Is there a process? This all remains to be seen. No president has ever before tried to use this act in this way. And so a lot of this is up in the air, and we'll just have to see how it plays out. A second piece of this that I think there's some misunderstanding about is that this does not challenge all of the tariffs that Donald Trump has imposed as president here in 2025. So there are a number of tariffs that are under different legal authority, Section 301 of the Trade Act, Section 232 of the Trade Act. Those are things like the actions on steel and aluminum and automobiles. There are other investigations right now for those for the semiconductor industry, lumber, copper, other commodities. Those are right now still on good footing. And I'm also receiving questions about what happened in the Trump 45 administration. So if everyone remembers, 8 years ago, the president rolled out tariffs on imports from China. Those range from 7% to 25%. Those are still in force on their terms. There have been some suits filed over those before the Court of International Trade, and this action really has no implication for that. So it's kind of narrow, the effect of this ruling overnight, but it is significant because there were many clients of mine that are in supply chain and international trade and moving product all over the world that really did not have a great deal of difficulty with managing tariffs and compliance until this year, until Liberation Day, as you mentioned. So there's a lot of focus on this, but the best message right now is to remain calm, remain compliant, and we need to see how this plays out.
Now, the White House has said that it should not be up to the courts to settle this matter. What is your response to that statement?
It's interesting. The short answer is that it is up to the courts, and this will ultimately probably go up to the Supreme Court. This remains to be seen, but the fundamentals behind this are interesting. I think it's good for people to hear. What the Court of International Trade did was to say that under the Constitution, the power and authority to assert tariffs rests with Congress, and Congress can delegate some authority to the President of the United States. Congress has done that over the years with various acts, but it's not a blank check. At least in terms of IEPA, it doesn't give the President the authority to impose tariffs worldwide, kind of at whim, and adjust those at whim. This is really at the heart of what the Court of International Trade decided last night. And so it's fair, I suppose, to say that, first, this isn't resolved. Second, Congress can essentially do what Congress pleases with respect to tariffs, but it hasn't, and it hasn't thus far provided a means for the president to do whatever the president pleases when it comes to tariffs. This is really where things end up. So, there are different parties here with different constitutional powers, and that's really at the heart of what is happening. So, for any Constitution buffs and history buffs, this is an interesting time to watch the balance of powers in America.
And speaking of the balance of powers, you mentioned a major branch of the government, the judicial, the Supreme Court. How soon could we see the Supreme Court get involved in this issue, if at all, in your opinion?
Yeah, the timing of this is kind of anyone's guess. I received many questions from clients who asked, what is the likelihood of an injunction? What is the likelihood that we get into this? A number of lawsuits were filed, and that those will lead here where there is an injunction. Today, an injunction occurred, but it has, of course, been stayed. The short answer for anyone in business and looking to manage their supply chains was until now, don't bet on it. My advice is always let's run a good business, let's be strategic, let's make sure that we're managing, our cost of goods day to day so that we don't have serious financial trouble. And that kind of remains to be seen. That's where we are right now. You can't really, bet on, the possibility that there would be an injunction and this ends immediately. And I think that that's still good conservative advice, right? We don't know the timing in which this will play out. We don't even know exactly how it will play out. But this is a very interesting development that is frankly giving a lot of optimism to a lot of businesses and a lot of importers in the United States, because maybe it means that these additional costs that were borne throughout the year to this point and still remain uncertain. Remember, the reciprocal pause is only until July 9. So we still get into third quarter before we see where even that plays out. This is still up in the air in many, many ways, but it is giving a lot of folks some optimism about where things may go and what certainty folks may have on the back half of this year.
You mentioned a little bit ago clients and companies wondering about the return of money. Can we talk a little bit more about that? If these tariffs hold as being unlawful, could businesses in America be reimbursed for the money that they have spent over the last month? And if so, how?
Yeah, it's entirely possible if monies were collected by the United States government through U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and that collection was ultimately deemed unlawful, then we would expect that folks would probably receive those overpayment of duties in return. It's unclear right now how that process would work. It's unclear whether that would require some additional filings or additional exercise on behalf of the importers who paid those duties, or if there will be new special mechanisms and processes in place to accomplish that. Folks really need to keep their eyes open and watch this process. One thing to potentially be concerned about is if there is a new process, or even if some of the traditional customs processes are required to get a refund, there could be very hard deadlines on when those refunds could be pursued and recovered. And so it may be the case that if someone's unaware and not paying super close attention, that they could essentially waive their rights to receive a refund of monies that were overpaid. But all this remains to be seen. The key takeaway is just like from the start of everything that happened this year, let's maintain awareness, let's maintain compliance, and let's run a good business. Those are still the ground rules today.
It almost sounds like you're describing the operating principles for business in any environment, but I guess they're operating principles for a reason. Are there any other questions that you've been getting specifically from your clients? I mentioned at the top of this conversation that you are a national expert in supply chain, and we at Forbes have heard from a number of entrepreneurs whose businesses have been affected and who are suffering and considering if they can stay in business even throughout the year. Is there another common question or consideration you're hearing from your clients in particular?
Well, one big takeaway that I hear from many, many people is that business planning has kind of moved from strategic planning and down to tactical planning. I have clients who on Liberation Day woke up and seriously emotionally believed that they were going bankrupt because they had moved supply chains, they did nearshoring, they did everything that they should have done following the Trump 45 term. And now they found that there are very significant tariffs on some of those countries where they were, they believe, encouraged to move their supply chains and move their sourcing. And so this was very serious for many, many clients, many operators until the pause. And even today, a 10% across the board universal tariff is a serious increase on landed cost of goods that needs to be managed either by negotiating with suppliers or finding cost savings elsewhere, or ultimately working with customers to try and recover that in just ordinary commercial senses. So it's a very serious issue. I get asked, what can I do about this? The answer is that there's no one size fits all supply chain and there's no one size fits all solution. But the toolbox is full of things like managing compliance, making sure that tariff codes are correct, making sure that the values of goods are correct, making sure that we're not overpaying. I've helped some clients and we look at the values that they're paying duties on, and we find that actually they're including things in dutiable value that maybe they didn't have to include, or that they can structure their transactions lawfully in ways that more appropriately tailor what the dutiable value may be. And I have other clients who look more broadly at their supply chain and they say, look, I have to pay what I have to pay, but these are very large checks that I'm writing now that I didn't have to write just a short time ago. Is there a way that I can manage cash flow? And so we help them think through possibilities like using bonded warehouses and using foreign trade zones and bonded carriers and other tools like this that can save them from writing one large check up front and maybe instead write smaller checks down the road as they actually draw down inventories. So everything's tactical today, everything's on the table. There are solutions for good businesses. Longer term, I'm confident that we will have a read on where the dust settles, probably sometime in third quarter. And then I'm confident we'll return to an environment where true strategic planning and true supply chain management can once again rule the day and we can have a thriving business environment like we all want.
Those are good business predictions. Let's get back to the litigation side of things. We've had a bevy of court action in the last 24 hours. What's your prediction or guess as to where we could be by the end of this week, this time next week? What do the next few days and weeks look like?
Yeah, I think that it's a really challenging time because there are a lot of factors. One is that we have a new trade deal that at least was announced in framework form with the UK and with China. We also have over the weekend, 2 weekends ago now, a threat of 50% tariff on imports from the EU. and the president put that on pause so that negotiations could occur. One of the arguments that the government is using at this point in time is that if this decision were not stayed, that would cause serious jeopardy to America's foreign policy interests because there are so many negotiations that are happening right now. And also because this pause that we're under will only last until July 9, unless it's further extended. That's just a little more than a month away. So there are many competing factors right now that are driving how this is playing out, in addition to the number of lawsuits that have been filed and the appeal that is filed right now. It's really a crystal ball game at this point in time to determine how these will work together and what the outcome may be. The number one thing remains to stay on our toes and to stay aware and to watch for change because I think that many folks in the business community did not expect the news that came out yesterday evening, and yet it did. And that's one more good example of why this is really a time to stay alert and to be cautious and diligent as we run our business.
It will be ongoing and we will be covering at Forbes. But in the meantime, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us and breaking down where we are right now as it relates to Liberation Day tariffs. We really
I
appreciate
appreciate
your time and your insight.
Thanks, Maggie.